If there's one thing you take away from this video, it's this. Sigma is a high damage, ranged duelist who can hold angles like no other hero in the game. A ton of players think Sigma sucks against dive heroes, but the key is to force out flankers like Tracer or Genji beforehand. And of course, against ranged comps, you need to be marking that Sojourn or Widow, threatening to delete your entire team. Sigma's primary fire, insert dead Ligma joke. Make Sigma fire 2 charges, dealing 55 direct damage each, with a maximum range of 22 meters before implosion. There's 3 main things to note. Firstly, let's start with the obvious. Your one-shot combo, in air quotes, is to Accretion, then primary fire, then melee. This will do 270 damage in total. You can exclude the melee and do 230 damage instead, which will get heroes like Echo, Sombra, Kiriko, etc. Secondly, if you're just within your effective range, so like 18 or 20 meters, you might want to aim at the enemy's feet instead. This will slightly decrease your range, which means at the very least, you're gonna land some splash damage. It's niche, but it might be helpful if you keep missing direct shots. The third bit of micro is that you can and should be looking around in between your Hyperspheres. This is what I like to call Pseudo-Scouting, and can greatly boost your awareness on Sigma, especially if you're playing against dive heroes. Now to general usage, and by far the most important thing is target priority. This does of course apply to your other abilities, but there's 3 key points to be made here. Firstly, you should be marking aggression generally. Secondly, you can mark multiple points of aggression at once with your kits. And thirdly, you should also devote some attention to the easiest targets to kill. For example, say you're playing against a Winston Ashe dive, and the Winston jumps your Baptiste. What should you do? Well, you can't break that Winston bubble that easily, therefore you can't rock him immediately. So you should devote your shield, Hyperspheres, and maybe your rock to just mark the Ashe. You could also rock the Winston before he dives, or after he jumps out. Maybe we complicate the situation, and say it's a Ball, Tracer, and Ashe dive. Then you can rock the Ball pretty easily, especially after he pops Pile Driver, shield off the enemy Ashe, and then shoot either the Ashe or Tracer, depending on how aggressive and killable they are. This is the skill ceiling with Sigma, and it can get complicated really quickly. Maybe the Ashe is out in open space, so going for your one shot with your rock makes sense. This leads me onto the last point with target priority, which is prevention. Tons of people think Sigma is bad against dive, but if you can hit your shots, I actually disagree. You can see Vestola straight up kill the Genji here before the enemy team have even set up. And to go further, here's an example from me breaking down and analysing Tread Sigma. And the main 2 concepts I want to go over here is marking with your Hyperspheres and marking with your shield. If you're mechanically talented enough and you can actually hit your Hyperspheres onto these squishy targets before they actually dive, that makes things a lot messier, and that means that the dive is a lot easier to absorb. And as we can see here, Tread gets 2 really nice Hyperspheres onto the Genji, and even better, he manages to flick and get the rock onto the Genji when the Baptiste is just 1 HP. If that Genji lives for like a second longer and gets that melee off, we probably get this Baptiste and we probably win this fight. And this is where the second concept of marking with your shield comes into play here. You can see the Doomfist touches points, and what does he do? He doesn't look at the Doomfist. He decides to shield off, rock, and mark the Ana and the Zenyatta here. So he gets a really nice rock into Keydog there on the Ana, and then he's able to shield off both of these ranged damage threats, which makes it easier for his team to peel off the Doomfist. Sigma's first ability, Super's Forehead, is a floating barrier. The shield has 700 health, regenerates at 85 shield per second after being down for 2 seconds, and it's got a cooldown of 2 seconds after being recalled. By far and away, the most common mistake that I see with shield are Sigma players wasting it on menial, non-lethal damage. If you're shielding damage, or you feel like your shield is getting broken too often, ask yourself, if I didn't shield here, what would happen? Do I need to be shielding this damage? Look at Vestola in this clip. He initially shields the burst of damage to allow him to rotate or move to the left side. He then immediately retracts his shield, and even though he's getting poked at by the Genji and the Hanzo, he only shields for a flash of damage because the aggression level by the enemy team isn't that high. All the damage he takes can easily be healed up without much of a fuss, and the only time he pops the shield is to block the Ana nades, which does nicely lead me on to how the shield should actually be used. In general, as you could probably guess, is to prevent or mark bursts of aggression. For example, blocking a hit scan on an aggressive angle, blocking ultimates like Shatter, Barrage or High Noon, or blocking important cooldowns like Mauga's Cardiac Overdrive, Ana's Nade, or even the healing. In this example, you can see Vestola shield off the Ana heals right before he pushes the Mauga to finish him off. Now onto some quick fire tips to get the most out of Sigma's shield. Firstly, make sure to shield when using your ultimates to prevent any incoming damage, or more importantly, from you being stunned out of your Flux. Secondly, you can shield dance against mobile heroes like Tracer, which is pretty uncommon nowadays, but still might be useful in some scenarios. Just tap your shield and move either side of it. Thirdly, remember to drop your barrier after you've used it for its intended purpose. So many lower level players just leave their shield hanging out in midair, meaning it could be broken, or it's not regenerating back to full health, or it's gonna be on cooldown when you actually need it. And lastly, if you are playing against a comp where your shield's gonna be useless, like against a Winston, Lucio, Kiriko, Genji and Tracer comp, use shield for your own benefits, because those heroes can easily outmaneuver your shield the second you place it down. More generally, of course, I do recommend watching that Tread example in the last section, so you can see how he utilizes the shield. Aside from that, there's not too much else to your shield. Just please mark aggression and not meaningless spam damage from 50 meters away. Sigma's second ability, the Suck, makes Sigma absorb incoming damage, converting 60% of it into shields, up to a maximum of 400 shields generated. The cooldown is 12 seconds, and the duration is 2. Using Grasp has pretty much always been the same since Sigma's release. The first use is to grasp preemptively to gain a ton of shield in the pre-fights. This is best done against projectile poke comps, and I specify projectiles because they're predictable forms of spam. Hanzo Storm Arrows, Junkrat spam, Pharah spam, Sojourn spam, Zen spam, you get the idea. The second, more common use is a reactive use to absorb a lot of incoming damage. This will mostly be in reaction to important cooldowns, or again, big bursts of aggression, Mauga's Overdrive, Bastion turret, or just general spam damage when you're low. There's also two more ideas that are crucial to grasp. The first is hard playing corners and cover so you don't get rocked while grasping. This is something that I noticed when watching Vestola and Hanbin. Vestola would rarely get rocked because he would often grasp to where he can get back into cover in time, but Hanbin was often caught in open space while grasping, meaning his team had to bail him out, or he was obviously rocked. The last fairly niche tip is to pay attention to ultimates that you can eat with Grasp. Blizzard is honestly the main one, but Grab can be included too. It's rare and niche, but if you know the enemy Mei has got Blizzard, pay attention to her body language to see if you can catch the blizzards. Sigma's third ability, the Everything Everywhere All At Once rock, makes Sigma fling a massive debris towards an enemy, dealing 120 damage, a 1.2 second stun, paired with a 10 second cooldown. For general usage, Accretion has got 3 main uses: as a potential one-shot, mentioned earlier, as a stun, or used as a failsafe. As a one-shot, this will typically be on isolated, immobile heroes who you're fairly certain that you can hit the rock with. In this instance, Vestola zones and marks the backline with the shield, as talked about prior, then flicks and hits the rock onto Stalker. If half his team wasn't dead, this would likely result in a kill. Now when I mean using Accretion as a failsafe, I just mean as a way of protecting yourself if someone like Ramattra, Orisa, Bull, Mauga, or anyone gets on top of you. A lot of the time, Vestola would often rock the enemy Mauga to hamper his aggression, but look at this example here. Team Falcons run in with a Mauga Stomp and Genji Dash, and Vestola is about to rock the Mauga. However, he sees the Genji in a much more punishable and killable position, so he switches target last minute and guarantees the kill onto the Genji. Of course, Accretion can also be used to stun vital cooldowns and ultimates. Blossom, High Noon, Coalescence, the list goes on. Sigma's ultimates make Sigma lift enemies in an 8 meter radius, lifting them in the sky for 50 damage, then slamming them back down for half of their max HP. There's quite a lot of min-maxing with Sigma's Flux, with the tech that I'm sure you all know. When you flux someone in the air, then you fly underneath them so that they land on your heads. You might think that this is useless, but Vestola actually did this tech against Team Falcons, fluxing the Baptiste in the air and making the Bap land on his head so the Bap couldn't lamp himself. While this is a Bap counter, also do this to throw off the timing of a Zarya bubble, Kiriko Suzu, or Ana nades. Just be careful to not get stunned out the Flux. Now in terms of broader usage, the main use is punishing isolated, squishy, immobile targets. It's a bit of a mouthful, but in short, you'll be fluxing targets that can't easily escape your flux circle. You can see some examples in the background from Vistola fluxing Hanzos, Baps and Iliaris. But this doesn't just have to be 1 or 2 targets. If the enemy team are pretty clumped up, then fluxing them also makes sense. A secondary use is to absorb dives. Very simple use. If a Winston jumps into your backline and you know that he hasn't got Primal, or a Doom is just coming out of Meteor Strike, or even if a Genji blades, these are all good cues to flux and relieve pressure off your backline. In this example, the enemy Genji pops Blade and Vistola fluxes, and while he doesn't catch the Genji and only catches the Sigma, the Flux itself zones away the rest of Team Falcons, so Vistola's team can stabilize. The third use is similar to the second. This time it's about punishing dives. This would be after the enemy Winston jumps out, after the Mauga runs out, then you flux to keep the enemy team on the back foot. In this example, the enemy Mauga pops his cardiac overdrive early and doesn't get much value during his cycle. Because Vistola has a cooldown and HP advantage, he decides to pop Flux to punish the enemy team, catching the Mauga and winning the fights. One of the main underutilized aspects of Flux that I still see to this day is that you can use it as a repositioning tool. You have no verticality as Sigma, so you can flux yourself up to strong high ground positions while dealing a ton of damage with your ults. In this instance, while Vistola doesn't catch anyone, he still manages to move to the high ground on New Queen Streets. This is more of a defensive example, but aggressive ones can be on Route 66, where you flux to move to the high grounds, and you've got an insane angle on everyone. Again, do be careful to not get stunned. The last bits of advice come from prior sections. Try and use your shield or hide behind natural cover to prevent getting stunned or just to avoid damage while you flux. Now onto the penultimate part of the guide, playstyle and composition. Positioning isn't actually that complex. As long-time viewers will know, I have the 4 rules of corners, line of sight or LOS, distance from flankers, and rotations. But I actually want to focus on the rotations part to this equation. In other words, it's very tempting as Sigma to just stack down main and shoot the enemy tank, which on first glance, it's something you'll see a lot of top level Sigma players do. However, when you can, you want to try and rotate to different positions in the mid-fights. Positions that maximize your ability to mark aggression from the enemy team and maximizes your ability to output aggression too. Here's an example from one of my coaching sessions.
Where should you rotate to?
High ground.
Why high grounds?
That's where the soldier is, and I can poke onto that choke.
Absolutely right, you can mark the soldier here for sure. You can actually drop down and rotate if you absolutely need to, but also you can rotate a little bit deeper, say their supports kite back in this direction down the main choke, you can catch them off in this way, or if they just play really far, that gives you the entire point to yourself. So it's really, it's very versatile in terms of your options here. Okay, you don't, right? And you can see here the issue. And this, if the soldier gets a kill here, that's on you. Before I continue, probably a good time to mention that if you want to get coaching yourself, check the top link in the description. It's backed by Sparlow, so that's how you know it's good. In terms of playstyles, there's actually not too much to mention here. I think the biggest thing most Sigma struggle with is playing Sigma into dive. That's when they typically swap off onto Orisa, Mauga, Ryan, or most other ground tanks. I've already made videos talking about how to beat dive, as well as multiple Sigma sessions on playing Sigma into dive, so I strongly recommend checking those videos out in the further resources section. Now onto the final section of this video, tank matchups. Sigma vs D.Va. D.Va's clear strength is being able to fly to positions that you simply cannot move to. The solution is to force her to make a choice. If she flies to high grounds, while you're busy beating the shit out of her backline, she will need to drop and help her backline. That creates space for your team and encourages that frontline matchup that you want. The second issue though is, what if D.Va flies onto my backline and blows them up? In cases like these, the best you can do is rock the D.Va and try to shoot or zone the aggressive squishy heroes that are blowing up your backline. Sigma vs Doomfist. You have 2 main goals on Sigma, poking out the Doomfist before he even goes in, and rocking him while he's already in, probably when he's power blocking. Still, a lot of the time, it's easy to get tunneled on shooting the Doomfist when he's so squishy, but don't let that distract you from the RNA that you need to shield, or the Ashe you need to be shooting at with your Hyperspheres. Sigma vs Queen. Generally, you have a pretty good matchup into Queen. You can whittle her down at distance without much risk to yourself, and if she does get close, you can often rock her to stunt her aggression.
The key thing is to not get knifed. Flash your shield when you see her toss a knife at you, then, unless there's other aggression you need to be blocking, retract your shield. Queen can easily force your grasp with a good knife pull. Sigma vs Mauga. Honestly, how tough this matchup will be will depend on how strong Mauga is and what map you're on. Your main win condition here is to find a way to absorb the Mauga's aggression, because more often than not, he'll look to go past you, stomp on your backline, and since you're not a great peeler, they'll just die. Unfortunately, there's no clear-cut solution to this. Team Falcons beat Vestola's team on the Mauga comp. What I can say though, is that the fundamentals of zoning, stunning, and marking aggression still apply in full force here. Rocking that Genji who goes a step too far, shielding that Ana who's healing the Mauga, shooting that Tracer or Flanker who's about to go in, all go a long way in being able to live through a Mauga rush. Sigma vs Orisa. Honestly, not too much to say here. You can rock Orisa out of her spear spin, and even up close, you can absorb a decent amount of her pressure. The key thing is the distance management though. Especially in the Brig, Juno, Orisa comps that we've been seeing, you really need to be careful with when you decide to push up. Make sure you have enough advantages, whether that be cooldown based, HP based, numbers based, etc., so that you don't blow up when you push back into an Orisa comp. Sigma vs Ramattra. The key thing is to pay attention to the push and pull of Ram cycles. In other words, when he's in his form, you generally should be giving space because you can't block his punches and you've got no armor. Once his form is close to over though, then you can push back in and punish him or his team, and this works even better with the Flux. Maybe this is a personal thing, but I see a ton of Ram players shred your shield very easily in the pre-fight, so do be mindful about that. Sigma vs Ryan. People often say that this is favoured towards Ryan, and individually that might be the case, but depending on your team comp and on the map, Sigma can destroy Ryan. The key thing is softening up his shield from distance before closing it and brawling the Ryan. I strongly recommend watching this 4-minute section where Vestola and his team hold mid-town against SSG, who are running a Ryan brawl comp. Admittedly, SSG didn't have a Mayor Symmetra, which would have helped them a lot, but this should give you a good idea of the basics in terms of when, why, and how you would push a Ryan comp. Sigma vs Hog. Mark the hooks as much as you can with your shield. Hog's value dramatically decreases the second he just missed a hook. Don't tunnel into just shooting him of course, because you could be shooting or dueling Squishies instead, but keep tabs on the Hog and punish him if he's got no cooldowns. Sigma vs Winston. Winston doesn't care about your shield, he can shield dance out of all your abilities, and his primal or zap doesn't care about your grasp. Still, you need to poke the Winston before he jumps, rock him if nobody else can be rocked, and if there's an Ana on the field, zone the shit out of that Ana. If there's not an Ana, then you can punish the Winston or other Squishies that are killable or dangerous. Sigma vs Ball. Obviously, rock the Ball after he goes in, just don't get too tunneled on what he's doing because he's not very killable. Disrupt his engage, fire a volley of Hyperspheres at the Ball, then focus your attention elsewhere unless the Ball becomes the main threat. Sigma vs Zarya. Distance and cooldowns are the key to this matchup. Zarya is more than happy to go up close if she's got a bubble to eat your rock. So, track her bubbles, force them out at a distance by poking her or a team, and you can actually punish a Zarya with rock, and you can actually push a Zarya with rock if you know she hasn't got the cooldowns to hold space. Lastly, I want to end this off with further resources that about 1% of you will actually use. Of course, I recommend watching Vestola or Sigma POVs on the OBS Sojourn channel. Those should be linked below if I do remember. And of course, I recommend watching my various Sigma coaching videos, focusing on a wide variety of topics from a variety of skill ranges. Not to do a last minute plug, but if you want personalized coaching, you know where to go. That's it for the guide, until next time.